She started with the vicarage. "No," they said, "we've too many mouths already." Then the baker. "I've no bed for waifs." Then the schoolhouse. "Come back in spring, maybe then." By the time the orphan girl reached the edge of the village, she'd knocked on 9 doors, and each one had treated her voice like it was made of air. Her name was Clara, though no one asked it. 12 years old, boots split at the soles, hair matted under a bonnet 2 sizes too big. Her mother had died the winter before, her father 2 months ago, in the poorhouse. Since then, Clara had lived on crusts and promises. But promises don't keep out frost, and crusts don't fill the hollow place where a child's sense of safety should be. That day, a Tuesday, the wind had turned sharp, and the sky looked like it had lost its way. Clara clutched the parcel that held her father's last waistcoat and wandered past the hedgerow where the houses ended. Beyond it sat the village church, old stone and moss-covered, and behind it, the yard where the forgotten were buried. Most children feared it. Clara didn't. Ghosts were nothing compared to the living who stepped around you. She sat on a toppled headstone and pulled her knees to her chest. "I'll just sleep here," she whispered to no one, "just tonight." But someone heard her. A low, gravel-thick voice called from the shadows between graves. "You'll freeze if you do." She startled, turning to see a man with a spade over his shoulder, mud on his coat, and a face carved by weather and silence. The Gravedigger. Mr. Ambrose, they called him. No one else lived beyond the church. No one spoke to him unless they had to. Clara stared, wide-eyed but too tired to run. "I won't steal," she said. "Didn't say you would," he replied. He crouched beside her, setting down a sack. From it he pulled a biscuit and held it out. "Eat first, then decide if you still want to sleep among the dead." Her fingers trembled as she took it. He didn't smile, but he didn't walk away either. And that made him the kindest person she'd met in weeks. Mr. Ambrose lived in a stone cottage tucked behind the chapel, part storehouse, part shelter, part memory. No curtains, no flowers, just stacks of firewood and a kettle always warming. When Clara followed him there that evening, her legs barely carried her. She wasn't sure why he let her inside. Maybe he didn't know either. He pointed to a bench by the hearth. "Sit." She obeyed. The silence between them was thick, not cold, like it had weight, not malice. He ladled stew into a tin bowl and slid it toward her. No questions, no sermon. She ate as if she might never again. After a while, he said, "You knock on the whole village?" She nodded. "All but the smithy. His dog bit me last spring." He grunted. "Good sense, then." She smiled. He didn't, but his eyes softened. "What's your name?" "Clara." "Just Clara." "My da was John Langley. Worked the brickyard till he got sick." Ambrose nodded slowly, as if remembering the name from a burial ledger. "You're the girl from the lean-to off Ridley's farm." "Not anymore," she said quietly. "They tore it down after he died." He didn't ask why no neighbor had stepped in. He already knew. The village was kind in public and cold in private. They dropped coins in a charity tin but turned their heads at hunger. "Can I sleep here?" she asked, nearly choking on the question. He gestured to the cot by the wall. "Just for the night. I'm no guardian." Clara curled up under a threadbare blanket, the heat from the hearth reaching her toes. Mr. Ambrose returned to his chair and began whittling a piece of wood, hands steady, eyes focused, mouth set in silence. In the dark, Clara whispered, "Why do you live alone?" He paused. "Because I buried the one I loved, and there wasn't anyone left worth speaking to after. Not even children. Especially not," he muttered. But he said it too softly to frighten. It wasn't anger. It was ache. Clara fell asleep listening to the rhythm of his knife against the wood. In that room of old stone and sorrow, the only sound left was two lost things, breathing side by side. When Clara awoke, the fire was low, but warmth still clung to the corners of the room. Mr. Ambrose was outside, digging. From the window she saw him lift a shovel of frozen earth and toss it with practiced motion, like he'd done it 10,000 times and expected 10,000 more. She didn't know what to do. Stay, leave, say thank you and vanish before he changed his mind. But she wasn't invisible anymore, and something about being seen, even once, made walking away harder. She stepped outside. The frost bit her cheeks, and her breath came in clouds. "You dig every day?" she asked. He didn't stop. "People die every day, even in winter, especially in winter." She wrapped her arms around herself, unsure what to say next. "Do you need help?" He paused, looked up, and for a second she thought he might snap. But instead he nodded toward a rusted wheelbarrow. "If you can push that, I'll load it." She smiled, teeth chattering. Her hands were raw, but they worked. Together they moved soil, carried planks, prepared a resting place for someone she'd never know. It was strange comfort to do something useful again. Afterward, back in the cottage, she stood quietly near the door. "I should go," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "And where to this time? Back to knocking on doors?" She didn't answer. He sighed. "There's food left. You may as well eat first." She sat. They shared bread and silence. Then he spoke again. "I knew your father, a little. He helped build the eastern wall of this cemetery." Clara looked up, startled. He never said. "Good men rarely list their deeds." That afternoon, while Ambrose mended a fence post, Clara wandered through the gravestones, running her fingers over names she couldn't pronounce. One was so worn it only read, "Beloved still." She stared at it, thinking of her mother. That evening she didn't ask for the cot. She simply curled up on it, and Ambrose didn't object. As he whittled again by the fire, Clara whispered, "Do the dead get lonely?" He paused. "Maybe, but I think the living feel it more." She didn't reply, but she knew then. She wasn't ready to leave, and maybe, just maybe, he wasn't ready to let her. The gravedigger's cottage was full of dust and silence, but Clara couldn't stand either. So by the fourth morning, while Mr. Ambrose was out back splitting logs, she found a cloth and started scrubbing. First the window panes, then the hearthstone, then the shelf where record books leaned in crooked lines. One large leather-bound ledger sat heavy with age. She opened it carefully. Names, dates, plots, notes in Ambrose's firm, squared hand. Infant, no name given. Widow, brought in by neighbour. Found by tree line, no kin. Clara's fingers paused over one entry. John Langley, brickyard worker, frost lung, buried East Row. Her throat caught. It was written so plainly, so briefly. She whispered, "He was more than that." Behind her, Ambrose's voice came low. "He was, but the dead don't argue their story." She hadn't heard him enter. He didn't scold her for touching the book. Instead, he stepped closer and looked over her shoulder. "You write?" he asked. "Not well. I learned bits from Mum." He nodded toward the inkpot. Then, "Fix what you want fixed." Her heart beat faster. With careful strokes, she added 2 words beneath her father's line. "Loved deeply." Ambrose said nothing, but he did not erase it. Later, while they shelled peas for stew, he asked, "Why those words?" "Because that's what I remember most. Not where he worked, not how he died. Just that." The next day he handed her another ledger, blank. "Start a new one, from today forward, not just the dead, everything. Everything. Things that matter, what the village forgets." So Clara wrote, shared pea soup, lit a fire, no one cried today. She added a drawing of the dog that barked at her every morning, and one of Ambrose as best she could. He looked more like a grumpy tree, but he didn't seem to mind. That week, something changed, not in a loud way, but in the quiet. The kind of change that lives between spoonfuls of stew and shared glances over a crackling log. Ambrose stopped saying, "Just for tonight." Clara stopped asking where to go next. She stopped knocking, because without either of them admitting it, she'd already come home. It was the first time someone else knocked on the Gravedigger's door. Clara and Ambrose froze mid-breakfast, the sound so unfamiliar it felt like thunder. Ambrose opened it with caution. Standing outside was a village widow named Edna Trask, hands clasped, eyes darting past him toward Clara. I heard the orphan girls staying here," she said, voice clipped with tension. Clara stepped into view, wary, Edna's lips pressed thin. "I've come to bring her back. She belongs with the parish." "She belongs where she's safe," Ambrose replied without stepping aside, "and she's safe here." "But it's not proper," Edna insisted. "A man alone, with a girl not his kin, people will talk." "Let them," he said. "They've talked before." Edna huffed. "You're not her blood. And neither are you." Clara clenched her fists behind the table, breath caught in her throat. Edna tried again. "The council said—" "The council never looked at her twice when she was hungry," Ambrose said flatly. "They can take their rules and bury them with the rest." Edna's face twisted in frustration, but she saw she'd lost the argument. She left with stiff skirts and muttered warnings. After the door shut, Clara whispered, "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did, but now they'll all say things about us." "Let them. Words don't hurt near as bad as hunger." He returned to his chair. She stood still, heart pounding. It was the first time she truly believed he might fight for her. That afternoon they walked together to the far side of the graveyard, where stones were few and trees grew thick. "This part's for the forgotten," he told her. "No names, no markers, just ground." "Can I help?" she asked. He nodded. She brought stones, he cleared brush, and together they began to line the edge of that neglected patch with care. "We'll make it proper," he said, "even if no one else does." That night, Clara drew a line in her new ledger. "Someone knocked today, but I stayed, because now someone knocks for me." She added a sketch of the gate with two figures walking side by side, small and tall, both holding spades. The cottage no longer felt like a stop along the way. It felt like the first chapter of something no one else could write. It started with the gate. The old iron latch creaked so loud it scared off crows. Clara asked if she could paint it. Mr. Ambrose shrugged, not opposed but not eager. "Why red?" he asked. "Because it's bold," she answered, "and because maybe someone will remember it's here." She saved her pennies for the paint, walked all the way to the apothecary to ask for leftover pigment. 3 days later, she returned with a chipped tin of deep barn red and painted every rusted bar like it mattered. When it dried, the gate stood out like a lantern against the drab stone. The next morning, the midwife passed by and paused. "New gate?" she asked. Clara nodded. "Same gate, just seen now." The midwife smiled. "Nice work." For the first time, someone in the village smiled at her without pity. Inside the cottage, Ambrose watched from the window. "You're making this place too cheerful," he said dryly. "Don't worry," Clara replied. "I won't touch your ledger shelf." But she did tidy the front walk. Then she polished the window panes. Then came a flower box, just one built from scraps, filled with marigolds she coaxed from near-dead buds. People noticed, not all said anything, but they walked slower past the cemetery now. Some even nodded. One left bread on the wall, another a folded note. For the girl who made the dead less forgotten. One morning, Clara found Ambrose carving wood again. This time, not a cross or a stake, but a nameplate. Heron for what? She asked, in case you ever need it on something more permanent. She stared at it, then smiled. I'd rather you hang it above the gate. He paused, then, surprisingly, he did. Clara Langley. Just 2 words. But it meant something now. She was no longer the girl people ignored. She was the girl with red paint on her fingers, who cleaned forgotten graves, who made stew when Ambrose's joints ached. In the ledger that night, she wrote, "Today someone asked for my name, and they remembered it." The wind outside no longer howled like a warning. It felt more like an old friend passing by a house that finally looked like a home. The letter arrived sealed in thick wax, bearing the vicar's crest. Clara spotted it first. Left on the gatepost she had painted red. She brought it inside with careful fingers, setting it before Mr. Ambrose as he stirred porridge. He didn't open it right away, just stared at the wax like it might bite. "What do you think it says?" Clara asked. "Probably that I'm not fit to keep a girl, that she ought to be placed in proper hands." "Do you want to know for sure?" "Not really." But he opened it anyway. The letter was short, precise, a notice from the parish board. Due to concern over appearances and lack of formal guardianship, Clara Langley was to be relocated to the town orphanage at fortnight's end. No appeal, no hearing, just a date. Clara went silent. Her spoon stopped mid-air. "You won't let them take me," she said. It wasn't a question. Ambrose folded the letter, his jaw locked like stone. "I've no right to keep you, Clara. But you already have. They don't care what's true, only what's written." She stood up, trembling. "Then we'll write something better." He didn't argue, but he didn't promise either. That day, Clara went to the churchyard with her ledger in one hand and a brush in the other. On the side of the tool shed she painted a list. Names they forgot. One by one she wrote the initials of the unmarked graves, beneath them in bold strokes. "We remember." The villagers saw. Some turned their heads, others whispered, but a few, just a few, nodded. One man even left a folded paper beside the gate. Clara unfolded it, a drawing of the flower box she'd planted with the words, "You've made something here." That night Ambrose sat long at the table, the letter unopened again before him. "If they come for you," he said slowly, "you don't run. You stand, let them see who you are." Clara whispered, "And what about you?" He looked at her like someone who had already decided long ago. "I bury the dead, but I won't let them bury the living." And in that moment, even if they took everything else, Clara knew one thing. She'd never be invisible again. The day before the parish officials were due to arrive, the sky turned pale and heavy with the scent of rain. Clara spent the morning cleaning every gravestone in the eastern row. If they were going to take her, they'd see what she'd built, what she'd remembered, what they'd ignored. Mr. Ambrose sharpened his tools with slow hands and a furrowed brow. He wasn't a man of speeches, but even silence can roar. That afternoon, as the village prepared for market day, Clara did something bold. She stood at the crossroads with her ledger and read aloud. Martha Tilling, buried without service. John Hart, lost in the storm. Rebecca Jane, only 6 months old. Villagers paused, stared. Some crossed the road to avoid her, but others listened. One by one they stopped to hear names no one had spoken in years. Then she turned to them and said, "You say I don't belong, but I remember more of this place than any of you." The midwife stepped forward first, then the cobbler. Then a boy who had once thrown a stone at her feet now stood silent, ashamed. When Clara returned to the gate, someone had tied a ribbon on it, red like the paint she'd used. That evening, Mr. Ambrose placed a folded coat on the table. "For tomorrow," he said, "you'll wear it when they come." "Am I going?" she asked. He looked at her. Only if we lose. Do you think we will? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. That night, the townsfolk gathered near the chapel, uninvited, unannounced, but there. When Clara stepped outside in the morning, the entire path to the gate was lined with people. They didn't hold signs. They didn't shout. They just stood. Witnesses. The parish cart rolled in with two men in grey coats and pale expressions. When they asked for Clara Langley, the vicar stepped forward. Not Edna Trask this time, but the vicar himself. I rescind the recommendation, he said firmly. She stays. She's done more for our souls than half the council combined. The officials blinked, surprised. One of them turned to Clara. You still want to stay here? She looked to Ambrose, then back at the graves. I already live here. You're the ones just passing through. The cart left empty. The village stayed quiet, and the wind that passed through the graveyard that day sounded less like mourning and more like applause. Sunday morning arrived with low clouds and the faint smell of ash from nearby hearths. Clara walked beside Mr. Ambrose to the chapel, not as a mourner or a shadow, but as someone invited. For the first time, she sat in a pew with others rather than behind the columns. Her hands trembled around the leather-bound ledger she carried, not the church's holy book, but her own, the book of names, drawings, and memories the village had once abandoned. When the sermon ended, the vicar stepped aside and called her name. Clara Langley has something to share. A hush fell over the chapel. Edna Trask stiffened in her seat, lips pursed, while the blacksmith's wife gave a small nod of encouragement. Clara walked slowly to the front, her boots echoing on the stone floor. She opened her ledger and began, These are the people we left behind, people who had no family, no marker, no voice. Her voice shook but didn't break. But they were not forgotten, not anymore. She read from a few pages, memories, sketches, a poem she had written about a grave lined in wildflowers. Some eyes welled with tears, others stayed solemn. But no one looked away. When she finished, she closed the book and stepped down. Mr. Ambrose stood at the back, arms crossed, watching not just her but the crowd. For once, they saw her, not as a girl to be pitied or dismissed, but as someone who had brought dignity to the dead and light to the living. After service, several came forward. One offered her a quill with silver trim. For the next names, he said. Another handed her a folded envelope, coins inside, to buy more flowers. Even Edna Trask approached, though stiffly. I was wrong, she muttered, but a girl like you, Clara interrupted gently. Not a girl like me. Just me. And Edna, surprisingly, nodded. That evening, Clara sat by the hearth, ledger in her lap, and added a new entry. Spoke in church. No one laughed. Some cried. Maybe I belong here, after all. Mr. Ambrose glanced over her shoulder and grunted. About time they caught up with the truth. And as the fire crackled, Clara knew belonging hadn't come from being accepted. It had come from standing firm until others learned to see what she already knew. The ground was soft from early rain, and wild violets had bloomed where Clara once cleared thistles. It had been nearly a year since she knocked on the gravedigger's door with no name, no home, and no hope. Now she stood beside Mr. Ambrose, shovel in hand, helping dig a resting place for a man no one had claimed. He was a drifter, Ambrose said. Did odd jobs, slept under wagons. Clara nodded. Still deserves the same care. Together, they worked in silence, broken only by birdsong and the scrape of iron against earth. When the grave was ready, Clara placed a small wooden marker at its head, not with a name, but with a carved symbol, a single open eye, seen. After they finished, they sat side by side beneath the yew tree, their hands dirt-stained and aching. Ambrose looked older now, but lighter too, less burdened by the solitude he'd once wrapped around himself like a cloak. "You've changed things," he said, "not just here. People come now, bring flowers, ask about those buried without names." Clara smiled. "You let me." "No," he said, shaking his head. "You didn't wait for permission. You made it yours." That night, she added one final page to her ledger, not for the dead, but for the living. The man who once buried alone now shares a table. The girl once turned away at every door now opens her own. The gate is red, the flowers bloom, and the names are never lost. She closed the book, not with an end, but a pause. Outside, footsteps approached. A young boy from the village, hat in hand, stood at the fence. "Miss Langley," he asked, "my grandmother passed. Mum said you might help us. Remember her right?" Clara rose, heart full. "I'd be honoured." As she walked with him to the cottage, Mr. Ambrose leaned against the doorway, arms folded. He didn't speak, just nodded. He didn't need to. She was no longer just a guest, no longer just an orphan. She was a caretaker of memory, a voice for the voiceless. And in a town that once forgot her name, Clara Langley had become the one they now remembered first. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more heart-rooted stories on Echoes of England. If you had seen her standing with that ledger, would you have stopped to listen too? Tell us in the comments.